the moment, the nostalgic moment he's seeking to recreate of the smell of the Ritz-Carlton lotion. It's
here's
perfect.
The thing.
Very human.
Here's the thing that I don't understand about it, honestly. If you got the lotion at the Ritz-Carlton, presumably that means it's like the Ritz-Carlton lotion.
Yeah.
Why do you have to drive around looking for it? Don't you just drive to the Ritz-Carlton?
That's great. He's like going to the W Hotel, and he's like, they don't have it.
I know.
It's like, no, they don't have it. It's the Ritz-Carlton lotion.
Exactly. Like the one thing we know about Ritz-Carlton lotion is where to get it. Right?
It's true.
Anyway, thank you, my friend.
I hope he's watching. Okay.
Much appreciated. All right. Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Super happy to have you here. When you ask questions, it turns out, when things that previously have been done in the dark are forced into the light, that makes stuff happen. There's something about the effect of sunlight. There's something about the public disclosure of previously secret maneuverings that makes stuff happen, that sets things in motion. You know, you turn on the light. You ever lived in an apartment or a house that like had bugs? I once was renting an apartment in San Francisco, and I had signed the contract, like I was ready to move in, and I brought over a friend of mine because I was so excited about this new apartment, and I brought my friend over, and I was like, let's, get some burritos, and I'll go over, and we haven't moved in yet, but I signed the contract, we're gonna move in the next few days, I'll show you the place. We walked in, it was nighttime, flipped on the light, roaches, and they ran for the corners. And I got out of that contract, and I did not move into that apartment. But my friend never wanted to go anywhere to eat dinner with me again. And I learned about that old anecdote that, you flip on the lights and stuff scatters. That works in the news too. And we keep seeing that dynamic again and again of people flipping on the switch and the bugs scattering. And in today's news, it has really become one of the most interesting things that has happened yet in this whole scandal. I'll tell you about how the dynamic's been working. Just 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had this startling revelation in the New York Times that related to one of the people who is a cooperating witness in the special counsel's investigation. He's actually the only person we know of who has been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation with Robert Mueller and the special counsel's office. His name is George Nader. He has multiple criminal convictions in multiple countries, including for child pornography and child molestation. But he has nevertheless turned up multiple times in the Trump White House. He's turned up in this photo with Donald Trump. And he turns up again and again and again in Trump Tower and interacting with Trump campaign officials in meetings that would later come under scrutiny by the special counsel's office as the special counsel looks at links between the Trump campaign and Russia's attack on the 2016 election. So a couple of weeks ago, we learned in the New York Times that that guy, George Nader, was in attendance at a previously unreported meeting that happened at Trump Tower in New York 3 months before the 2016 election. At that meeting, according to the Times' reporting, a foreign company pitched the Trump campaign on what would be a foreign-funded social media manipulation campaign, which they were offering to mount in the United States in order to help Trump win the election. So that was a fascinating, obviously very troubling revelation. Any effort like that, of course, would be illegal on a whole bunch of different grounds. It would be a foreign expenditure, using foreign workers to manipulate the American electorate somehow in ways to benefit a U.S. presidential candidate with the knowledge of the U.S. presidential candidate, since that was his campaign being pitched on this proposal. So it was amazing reporting by the Times, very disturbing revelation. The name of the company that reportedly pitched that seemingly illegal plan to the Trump campaign 3 months before the election was a company called Psy Group, P-S-Y, Psy Group. But it's interesting, by the time we read the name of that company in the New York Times, by the time we learned about that scheme in the New York Times just a couple of weeks ago, the Psy Group was long gone. Apparently, agents working for the special counsel's office in February had stopped the founder of that firm, the guy who'd been at that meeting supposedly pitching that plan to the Trump campaign. They stopped him at an airport in Washington, D.C. They questioned him and, quote, briefly seized his electronic devices. They later brought him before the grand jury. And that attention, those questions to that businessman about whatever he was doing with that firm, those questions had consequences. He got stopped in February. They checked his electronic devices. They brought him before the grand jury. Simultaneously, FBI agents working with Mueller's team turned up at the Psy Group, turned up at the firm and started talking to employees. Mueller also reportedly subpoenaed bank records for the firm. And you push that stuff out into the light, you start asking those questions, it makes stuff happen. What did the firm do right after those approaches from the special counsel's office? They decided that they would disappear. February 25th, the firm's CEO informs its employees that the company is disappearing. It will be shutting down. So by the time that whole new part of the Mueller investigation that we didn't know about before, by the time it made it into the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, the Times was only able to report that that company is, quote, in liquidation. Yeah, Mueller started asking around, they decided to disappear. You start asking questions, stuff happens, right? Things get forced into the light, stuff happens. This week, we learned that it had happened again in a very similar fashion, but with a different foreign firm. This time it was Cambridge Analytica, which was the data firm that was hired by the Trump campaign. They've since gotten themselves into a million different kinds of trouble. Last year, we learned that Mueller's investigators had started looking at Cambridge Analytica. They'd asked the firm to hand over communications, hand over emails from their employees. The Wall Street Journal reported that Cambridge Analytica had been in touch with WikiLeaks, offering help in distributing Democratic documents during the campaign that had been stolen by Russia. Well, in March of this year, reporters started tracking down yet another scandal about the firm. The story of the firm using its own stolen data. Tens of millions of private profiles that they stole off Facebook without consent and used to build basically the spine of their operation as a company. Reporters started asking around about that in March. Well, this week, the Financial Times in Britain reports that those questions that reporters were asking about that scandal, those questions caused two things to happen at that firm. Number one, according to the Financial Times, those questions from reporters about that data scandal caused the Cambridge Analytica CEO to withdraw $8 million in cash from the company and to take it home. And number two, that started the process of the company starting to disappear. The company does still appear to be in trouble. The CEO appears to still be in trouble. The questions of what exactly that company did for the Trump campaign and whether it was part of a foreign influence operation, those remain open questions in terms of the Mueller investigation. But reporters pressing that firm on those questions appear to have caused that firm to disappear. Cambridge Analytica shut itself down. They technically no longer exist. We see this dynamic again and again with all these mysterious entities that have been operating in the dark. Somebody walks into the room, flips on the light switch, things change. When they get pushed into the light, when people start asking questions, stuff happens. Today, we obtained the transcript of a court hearing that took place yesterday in federal court in New York City. It's a court case involving Elliot Brody, deputy finance chair of the RNC until recently, when he resigned in a sketchy hush money scandal that supposedly involved him paying off a mistress who got pregnant. But oddly, for that transaction, Mr. Brody chose to use Donald Trump's hush money to the mistress lawyer, as well as Donald Trump's other hush money to the mistress lawyer. And he also used Donald Trump's pseudonym, Donald Trump's own pseudonym from his other hush money to the mistress cases. Why was Elliot Brody using all Donald Trump's stuff for his own mistress case? Then as soon as anybody inquired about this unusual, very Donald Trump-like mistress hush money deal, Mr. Brody issued an over-the-top mea culpa. He came clean about everything and he instantly resigned from the RNC. Someday we will finally figure out what actually happened there, and it's going to be an amazing story. I will tell you, it is not, that particular one is not an amazing story that I'm looking forward to seeing the movie of. That's one I would prefer to read in print. But someday we will get that full story. And Elliot Brody's troubles extend well beyond that literally unbelievable mistress controversy, which supposedly is what ended his time as the deputy finance chairman of the National Republican Party. Mr. Brody was also the business partner of George Nader, who is that cooperating witness in the Mueller investigation, the one who's cooperating in exchange for immunity. Mr. Brody is also caught up in a number of different scandals involving alleged influence peddling on behalf of foreign interests, including clients in Malaysia and in United Arab Emirates and in other countries. As part of that drama in federal court yesterday, a judge ordered a effectively the disclosure to the court of who the nation of Qatar secretly had working for them in this country. And that ruling yesterday in federal court in New York led to this dramatic headline today at Politico. Key figures sever ties with Qatar. It's also led at least one American who's caught up in the scandal about unregistered foreign agents involving Elliot Brody. It's caused at least one American to announce today that whatever work he might have done with Qatar before, he's not doing it anymore. And by the way, on Friday, he's going to retroactively register as a foreign agent. So what's the overall story with these other flows of foreign money involving these Gulf states? And the Mueller investigation looking into that, what's the relationship between this cascade of Elliot Brody scandals and the cooperation of Elliot Brody's business partner with the Mueller investigation? And we don't know yet. We don't have the answers to those questions yet. But asking questions about it, forcing this stuff into the light, is making stuff happen. We got this amazing statement tonight from Joey Elaham, who is the guy who's being forced out into the open by the court in terms of his relationship with Qatar. Thanks to this Elliot Brody lawsuit, Mr. Elaham told us tonight, quote, "So I don't know if I ever was a so-called legal agent of Qatar, but I do know that as of Friday, I'm not anything with them." As of Friday, he will retroactively have had nothing to do with them. He will also register as their foreign agent. Now, Mr. Elaham also tells us tonight that his sudden abandonment of Qatar has nothing to do at all with that court hearing yesterday. But the judge yesterday did order him to respond to a subpoena in this case. And when you ask questions, stuff happens. When stuff is forced into the light, stuff happens. When courts force the disclosure of previously secret dynamics, stuff happens. And we have seen this over and over and over again in Trump administration scandals. I mean, talk about hush money. It randomly was the Stormy Daniels hush money lawsuit that brought about the exposure of all those mysterious payments that had been made to President Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. Those mysterious payments to Michael Cohen from all sorts of unexpected sources. It was the Stormy Daniels lawsuit that showed us how the pharmaceutical firm Novartis and how the giant telecom firm AT&T had apparently put Michael Cohen on their corporate payrolls to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars a month. And they were apparently quite happy to have him on the payroll, right up until the moment that those payments got exposed because of the Stormy Daniels lawsuit. That exposure to the light suddenly made Novartis Pharmaceuticals and AT&T both decide that those payments to Michael Cohen had been a mistake. The public exposure of those payments led AT&T to fire their chief lobbyist, led Novartis to fire their general counsel. None of that would have happened had that not been pushed out into the light. They had Michael Cohen on the payroll. It wasn't a secret to them. It's only when it stopped being a secret to us that all of a sudden they decided it was a bad idea and that people had to go. We see this dynamic at work over and over again and on almost every element of the scandals that swirl around this administration and this president. But now tonight, it is maybe my most favorite one yet. I mean, we've seen all along, reporters start asking questions, FBI agents start asking questions. When it starts to look like things are going to get exposed in court, all of a sudden, people change. You know, people realize they need to register as a foreign agent. People separate themselves from countries they used to work for. Whole companies disappear into thin air. Corporations that can't really disappear into thin air suddenly decide to become much more critical of their own behavior they didn't previously see as a problem. They start firing their executives to try to make the problem go away, to try to make themselves look like they recognize their mistake. Well, the latest iteration of this dynamic in the era of Trump administration scandals, the latest one that's just happened today, may be like the apex example of that dynamic at work. This is courtesy of reporter Christina Wilkie at CNBC. Quote, as Robert Mueller looks ever more closely at President Donald Trump's foreign business ties, one former associate has remained outside the spotlight despite playing a key role in Trump's quest for real estate deals in the former Soviet Union. Architect John Fotiadis designed some of Trump's most ambitious luxury developments there. Fotiadis' work offers a window into Trump's dealings in the complex, opaque world of Eurasian real estate. today, several of these projects are reportedly under scrutiny by the special counsel, who's investigating Russian meddling in the 2016 election and any means by which Moscow might have exerted influence over Trump or his campaign, including through business deals. After McClatchy reported in April that Mueller's probe was looking more closely at people involved in Trump's business dealings in Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Russia, and after CNBC received a tip that architect Fodiatis had worked on several Trump projects in Eurasia, CNBC reached out to Mr. Fodiatis on April 11th for comment about his work. This is the amazing part. Are you ready? So they reach out to him on April 11th. Quote, Fodiatis did not respond to a call or to an email, but 8 hours later, he announced on Twitter that he was closing his architecture firm after 10 years in business. A few days later, he closed down the Twitter account that he had used to announce that he was closing down his architecture firm. By the end of the week, all the content from his professional website, including his entire international architecture portfolio, had been removed from the web. Also gone was any reference to the 2 overseas branches of his architectural firm that he had opened in Georgia and in Ukraine. Mr. Fodiatis has still not answered repeated calls, emails, or text messages from CNBC with questions about his work in Eurasia or about why he so suddenly shuttered his company. He's also declined comment on whether he has been contacted by anyone from Robert Mueller's office. Investigators asking questions, judges demanding disclosure, reporters poking around, looking at stuff, looking stuff up, being nosy, following leads, making calls. That's what makes the world go round. That's what makes my world go round, at least. I mean, those things can cause amazing stuff to happen in the world. But to make an entire architectural firm disappear with one phone call, that is an amazing trick. CNBC just disappeared Donald Trump's longtime architect and his entire international architecture firm with a single phone call. That's a trick. That reporter joins us here next.
It was an odd moment in the Senate tonight. The Senate passed a resolution allowing the Senate Intelligence Committee to help the Justice Department on, quote, a pending investigation. But that resolution gave no details about the investigation. In other words, it gave no details on what the Senate was voting on. Here's the statement from the Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr and Vice Chairman Mark Warner. The Department of Justice has sought the assistance of the committee in a pending investigation. The committee is cooperating with the department on this matter. Any questions about the investigation should be directed to the Department of Justice. So United States senators had to just vote blindly on having the Intelligence Committee help out the Department of Justice, and they did. It was a unanimous vote. They didn't even have a roll call vote on it. Also today, we learned Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is asking witnesses to turn over their personal cell phones, and witnesses have reportedly complied because the alternative would be a subpoena. CNBC reports Mueller's team wants the phones to inspect their encrypted messaging programs and potentially view conversations between associates linked to President Donald Trump. Since as early as April, Mueller's team has been asking witnesses in the Russia probe to turn over phones for agents to examine private conversations on WhatsApp, Confide, Signal, and Dust. Investigators seem to be convinced that the apps could be a key to exposing conversations that weren't previously disclosed to them. This news comes 2 days after Robert Mueller accused Paul Manafort of witness tampering in his federal tax and money laundering case. According to court documents filed Monday, Manafort contacted witnesses through an intermediary and used an encrypted app to send text messages to witnesses. One witness told the FBI that Manafort was reaching out in, quote, an effort to influence the testimony of potential witnesses. Joining us now, Ron Klain, former Chief of Staff to Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Al Gore, and a former senior aide to President Obama. Also with us, Joyce Vance, a former federal prosecutor. She's also a professor at the University of Alabama School of Law and an MSNBC contributor. And Ron, I first want to go to you on this mysterious resolution that moved across the Senate floor tonight. And this is the kind of thing that the Intelligence Committee will do from time to time. Senators had to approve it, and if they wanted to ask questions about it, I suppose they could pull aside Chairman Burr, but they were told, if you really want to know, ask the Justice Department what we're up to.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of resolution is part of Senate procedure when the Senate has information confidentially that the Justice Department wants. So I think we got to be careful about overreading into this. This may not even be related to the Trump-Russia-Mueller investigation at all. It could be another counterintelligence investigation that the Justice Department is looking into. So all we know is that the Senate Intelligence Committee had something the Justice Department wanted. Given separation of powers, there's no subpoenas involved. You get this kind of resolution that authorizes the committee to turn that information over to the Justice Department.
But Joyce Vance, there is one case that we know both the Justice Department through Special Prosecutor and the Intelligence Committee are investigating, and that is the Trump-Russia investigation.
That's absolutely true. I think Ron makes the correct point here. It's an intriguing detail. We don't yet know if it's related directly to the Mueller investigation. There are a lot of leak issues pending. There are other sorts of details chasing around Mueller. I think that we'll simply have to try to sit on this one for a day or two and see what shakes out.
So, Ron, it looks like cell phone sales have exploded in Washington in the last few months, because when you turn in your cell phone to the special prosecutor, you're, of course, going to have to immediately go get another one so you can get through the day. What do you make of this rounding up of all the cell phones?
Yeah, well, it's pretty clear that Paul Manafort's new phone, who-dis defense is not working. I mean, I think, Lord, sometimes we lose sight of all the noise and Twitter attacks by the president, whatever, that what's going on here really is a very serious criminal investigation. Paul Manafort is accused of some very serious crimes, including conspiracy against the United States. If he's not taking it seriously, Bob Mueller and his team certainly are. And if he tried to tamper with witnesses, as the special counsel alleged this week, then of course they are going to turn the tables over, looking for evidence of that. This is a criminal investigation. This isn't just politics. This isn't just Twitter. This isn't just a bunch of controversy. It's a criminal investigation, and Paul Manafort's at the center of that criminal investigation.
And Joyce Vance, they are specifically trying to crack through these encryption apps to get at what's in these phones.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as a prosecutor, this is one of the issues increasingly that we deal with, technology. And there are some sorts of applications that just are what we call going dark that prosecutors can't quite get to. So imagine how delightful it is for Mueller's team to have access to witnesses who are bringing in their cell phones, and then they can sit down with them and say, walk me through this, and let's see what's on your encrypted apps. Let's look at dust together and see what you've got. And the beauty of it is this. Mueller has already sent out subpoenas to a lot of subjects and targets in this investigation and to the White House, asking to see communications, emails, and text messages. Now he's got a way of checking to see whether or not he's been given everything he should have been given pursuant to those subpoenas, or whether items that were being exchanged on these encrypted apps have been withheld. And if that's the case, Mueller will really have hit the mother lode in many ways.
Joyce, just for the people in the audience wondering about these scenes, you're sitting there with a federal prosecutor at the FBI, your phone. They're asking you how you get inside to various apps. Can you just make a deal with them, as it were, or just talk about, is it okay if we don't look at certain sections of the phone? Do the prosecutors generally know exactly where they want to look?
So this is very situational. It depends so much on the case, the defendant, or rather the witness you're talking to, how important they are to your case. You know, typically prosecutors don't like to ask questions that they don't know the answer to, but sometimes you're rummaging around for information. And so you might get into a situation where you would say, this is what we're interested in. We don't want to rummage through your phone wholesale, but we'd like, with your permission, to voluntarily look at these things and to have you walk us through it. And that often is the best solution for both parties in this situation.
And that's why that format is much better than a subpoena, where you wouldn't have any control whatsoever, or any discussion about what they do with your phone.
Yeah, there could be a lot of different nuances here. It's better for prosecutors. Frankly, it can be a faster route to seeing what's on the phone. It can be a show of cooperation for a witness who wants to make clear that they should be a witness, not a subject or a target in the investigation, or a way of beginning cooperation with the government. So lots of different possibilities here.
Joyce Vance, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Ron, please stick with us. And coming up, the Kardashian Pardon Office had a big success today, but would the president have issued clemency to a woman in prison today if she had not been convicted of the same crime Paul Manafort is charged with? Money laundering? The president used his pardon power today to commute the life sentence of someone who was convicted, among other things, of money laundering. The same thing Paul Manafort is now charged with. Would the president have commuted the sentence of Alice Marie Johnson if she had only been convicted of drug charges and not money laundering charges? Would the president have commuted her sentence if a reality TV star had not intervened personally on her behalf? Of course not. And so the Kardashians have now replaced the Pardon Office in the Justice Department as the people to go to if you want to pardon, along with any Fox News show. Today in Israel, Rudy Giuliani insisted that the president can pardon himself, but he doesn't need to.
Does he have the power to do it? Yes. Is he going to do it? No. Not going to do it.
Do you think he needs to do it?
No, he doesn't. He's innocent. He hasn't done anything wrong.
And today, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, where the impeachment process begins, said he doesn't know if the president has the power to pardon himself, but it's just not done.
Mr. Speaker, do you believe that the president has the power to pardon himself?
I don't know the technical answer to that question, but I think obviously the answer is he shouldn't, and no one is above the law.
In his comments today in Israel during a paid speaking engagement, Rudy Giuliani said that the special prosecutor is trying to frame the president of the United States.
They are a group of 13 highly partisan Democrats that make up the Mueller team, excluding him, are trying very, very hard to frame him, to get him in trouble when he hasn't done anything wrong.
Joining us now, Stephen Brill, the co-CEO of NewsGuard, and he's the author of the new book, Tailspin. Also joining us, David Corn, Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones and co-author of Russian Roulette. And Stephen, you're a lawyer. You hear a former United States attorney, former federal prosecutor, saying that these people working in the Justice Department are trying to frame the president of the United States.
Right, and that's why I've been saying for a while, I think that what's going to happen is if he gets a subpoena, he's going to take the Fifth Amendment.
So isn't he going to fight the subpoena all the way to the Supreme Court?
No, because that's a long battle of legal briefs. He doesn't have the best lawyers necessarily to write the briefs, but if he takes the Fifth, what he says is that the Founding Fathers wrote the Fifth Amendment for precisely the kind of witch hunt, the kind of framing that Rudy is talking about. You know, and it's only, 3 amendments away from the Second Amendment, so his base will probably be good with it. It's a much better way to just end this whole piece. It's simple, and it's entirely consistent with the narrative that they're framing, which is that it's a witch hunt. The Fifth Amendment was written for witch hunts.
David Corn, a couple of things. First of all, this is a new theory of the case, a new theory of the approach, the Fifth Amendment. It makes perfect sense when you actually re-engineer it back into what Donald Trump has been saying about witch hunt. But Rudy Giuliani there in Israel today during a paid speaking engagement in a foreign country saying that the Justice Department is, through the special prosecutors, trying to frame the president of the United States.
I want to pick up on what you just said when you asked Steve the question. Rudy Giuliani, best known as America's mayor, for better or worse, but he was a federal prosecutor, the U.S. attorney in New York, and he worked at the Justice Department in the Reagan years. And this guy now is basically claiming that the U.S. judicial system, the law enforcement system, is conspiratorial, part of a deep state, and out to frame Donald Trump. This is what the far right has been saying for months, if not a year and a half, that this is all some gigantic plot with Jim Comey, FBI, fake news media. They try to stop him from becoming president. There's no evidence of that. They followed Trump's lead on wiretapping and unmasking and the spy being inserted by the FBI into his own campaign. So, to use the president's own terminology, it's really sad to see Giuliani sink to this level and try to discredit the Justice Department, the FBI, without a shred of evidence.
And Steve, we remember that the special prosecutor, it's a legal construction, but there's always been a political piece to it. And the political piece prior to now has always been the special prosecutor should be from the opposing party of the president. That's where most of them came from. We wouldn't believe the investigation of Bill Clinton if the special prosecutor was a Democrat, and so the special prosecutor was a Republican. And that's the way it's been pretty much all the way through. He is a Republican.
I mean, just imagine.
I mean, Donald Trump is the first Republican president to get a Republican special prosecutor.
Right. And just imagine if they had appointed your prior guest, Ron Klain, who's certainly qualified for it, that people would go nuts. The president's position that he can pardon himself. I just finished doing a book about the protected versus the unprotected, the unaccountable. That is the ultimate in unaccountability, and yet he ran as the person who was going to speak up for the unprotected against the protected in the swamp in Washington, and he's claimed now the ultimate protection, which is he can pardon himself.
And David, there are reports indicating that the president is just sitting there saying, bring me more pardons, bring me more pardons. There are reports that there are dozens of pardons now being assembled in the White House for possible issuance any minute.
Well, the absurd element of this is that he's starting a new reality TV show, Celebrity Pardon. Bring me not the pardons, bring me celebrities advocating certain pardons. You have the right celebrity advocate, and you win this week. You get a pardon. Wrong celebrity advocate, maybe Meryl Streep, and you don't win. But the other message he's sending here is that he's susceptible to lobbying for pardons, and that, as he has done prior to the pardon today, often sees pardons in political terms, often to help him with his own base. So he's truly perverted the pardon system, and like everything else, making it about Donald Trump.
What I would love to see is if he pardons Mike Milken. What would Rudy do about that?
If he pardons people Rudy was part of prosecuting. Go ahead, David, quickly.
No, I said yes. I mean, because he's pardoned people who Jim Comey and Jim Comey's lawyer, Patrick Fitzgerald, have prosecuted. But it's all about discrediting. It goes back to my first point. The entire federal prosecution system. Why? Because it's looking at Donald Trump and his associates.
Stephen Brill, the author of the masterful new book, Tailspin, and David Korn, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. When we come back, the Republican Party got wiped out last night.